Hello, everyone. How come vaccine developers and scientists ended up becoming international statesmen and diplomats at the peak of geostrategic rivalry between two superpowers? Why did Dr. Jonas Salk, the maker of polio vaccine, refuse to patent his vaccine? Is the public funding of health research the best and most sustainable way? We try to find answers to these complicated questions with our guest, Professor Nikolai Petrovsky. This is fourth in the series of our programs on vaccines and vaccinations. In doing so, we trace a little history of global health leadership over decades up to the contemporary times when we experienced COVID-19. Take a listen. 70, 80 years ago, when the geopolitical rivals, both United States and USSR, were collaborating, as you mentioned in the earlier programs, at the height of their geopolitical rivalry when it was peaking, and they were collaborating in polio research, and the oral vaccine by Sabin had millions of folks in Soviet Union being recruited for the clinical trials of that vaccine. So we've come a long way in 60, 70 years in this regard.
Well, unfortunately, maybe we've gone backwards I would say, in 60 or 70 years.
Hmm.
I think we're at the low point, perhaps, of public health, over the last 100 years. The COVID pandemic arguably is the low point of public health. It hasn't been lower, and I think that's reflected in the statistics
Hmm.
of the low level of public confidence in health authorities
Hmm.
is at historic lows post the pandemic, and again, unfortunately, it was all predictable.
Right.
Because they ripped up the rule book in their approach to the pandemic. We already had pre-pandemic policies of how to tackle pandemics, because this has been debated globally. WHO was involved, all the national health authorities. They'd all written essentially a book of how to manage a pandemic. And that book was completely ripped up during the pandemic. None of it was followed. Because you look at rule number 1, engage the public. Rule number 2, don't pressure the public or mandate anything. You've got to educate and encourage. Rule number 3, don't stop people being able to to socialise and to travel, and because that their civil rights are such that even if that might have an impact, you can't justify it under normal circumstances. Not particularly once it's a global outbreak. You're not going to stop it moving by stopping people moving.
Hmm.
Guess what? They ignored all of those things and did the exact opposite. And you'd have to say why and who made those decisions and on what basis, because there was no, if there was going to be a basis for a decision, it should have been what was the policy, already written down that we were meant to follow during the pandemic. And why did public health authorities, who persuaded them to rip up the rule book and just make the rules as they went? So them, for them to justify it now, saying we didn't know what, it was a new outbreak. We should be excused because there was uncertainty. No, there wasn't. There was a rule book. Because we've been through many pandemics in history. We've learned from those pandemics, and so that's why we have policies that reflect what our learnings were previously. So why was that all ripped up and ignored? That to me is that's what's not excusable. There's no excuse for that.
Several instances when the rate of vaccination in a community goes down, just like it happened in COVID, the infections or the outbreak were spotted, measles, mumps. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to stay, probably to end our part about the history of vaccine development and For those who don't know, maybe it's a philosophical question, but Jonas Salk, who developed the injectable vaccine, when he was asked after the vaccine was discovered and proven successful, he was asked by a reporter that, "Will you patent this vaccine?" And he famously said, and the clip is available on YouTube in a variety of ways, that he said that, "Can you patent the sun?" So what I feel that he was talking about, or visualizing a world where the vaccination and eradication of diseases through vaccination would be a greater good, something that would be available to everyone. So seems like again, we have come so far away from that entire idealistic vision of Dr. Jonas Salk that what will it take, Dr. Petrovsky, to somehow revive this level of trust, or is it just gone forever?
Yeah, look, I think that that was a different world. As
Right.
I say, we had the Cold War, and we had the US and the Soviets cooperating, sharing technology. No one patenting, all that technology was shared globally. No question about getting money for it or someone exploiting it. But that was an environment where both the development of the vaccines, but also the public health was essentially government funded.
Right.
I mean, it was the public. The public owned the technology, whether it was in the US or elsewhere. The drug companies weren't really centre stage, which they were obviously during the recent pandemic, where we saw Pfizer, Moderna, big companies making hundreds of billions of dollars of profit. So it was a different world. It was a world in which, public health was much bigger. The amount of money that governments gave to public health was much bigger, and that was true globally. So whether you're on one side of the Iron Curtain or the other, that the public health people all shared the same vision. I think now, it's become much more fragmented, polarized, profit-driven, as you say, and political.
Mm.
Now it's almost one country trying to prove their technology is better than
Mm.
the other country. Certainly not freely sharing that technology. And again, this is just commenting on what happened during COVID. Um, so unfortunately, yes, we've gone backward. But I think the world has changed. I think systems have changed. It was a different world, believe it or not. You meet those guys like the sulks of that generation. They're very statesmanly, they're not driven by money or
Mm.
the same people today, or the same people occupying the same positions, are very different people, even like in terms of their motives, their drivers. So that, yeah, the world has changed. So can we go back? I guess no one ever likes to think of going backwards.
But
Everyone
going
likes.
back to good old days, I mean, where the public
No,
health
I
was,
know, but
well, Professor
you
Petrovsky,
talk to anyone my age, we all want to go back to the good old
right?
days.
No, because
Because I
in
was
those
just
days,
talking, in fact, earlier tonight with some friends, and we're saying, the golden years, you know, from the 1980s, through the early 2000s, like for me as a young doctor and researcher, they were fabulous years. Research was in its heyday. DNA had just been mapped, and we had the Human Genome Project.
right?
I would yes, personally I would love to go back. Um, the question is always, can we go back, and are we just remembering the good things and ignoring the bad things? I'm not sure, but I don't think the world's as good a place today as it was
I
20 years ago, and I guess a lot of people would agree with me. The question is always, is can you recapture the good things from 20, 30 years ago, or are we destined to keep going in the direction we're going, which unfortunately doesn't look promising.
Dr. Petrovsky, whether it's nations, I don't want to sound too philosophical, but just having read some of the literature and some of the things uh, that we've actually talked about, even from the history of use of mercury as preservative, each household, organization, and country has its own memory span and its own memory that helps it navigate through different challenges, unforeseen situations, and even the moments of joy. So I think the more we document those partnerships and those collaboration that eventually led to successful public health initiatives and success stories, it leads the way and it educates people who probably are new to the field or haven't stayed long enough in this field uh, to revive the field of public health as a unifying and more innovative and more collaborative field going forward. Because if something can go downhill, then there is always a chance that it will make a comeback uphill. It will come back again in better and new ways.